Hey everybody, Melissa Mackenzie, the publisher of the Spectacle and the American Spectator, of course, with my co-host and the very good-looking man from Louisiana, Scott McKay, bearded
Wait,
and
I do
all.
some work on her from last week to get to this.
I know. So Scott McKay, who is reviver.com, R-E-V, was it?
RVIVR.
R-I, you know what? That's difficult for me.
It's the
R,
word reviver, but we got rid of the E's because it saved us $50,000 buying the domain.
I see. Okay. And also the Hayride, of course, which is he's the expert on all things Louisiana and national politics for that matter, which is why we're both here. And this week, we are going to start on something utterly frivolous, but I think it's important. We did talk about it last week. Scott probably is skeptical about whether we should talk about it at all, but I think one of the
I'm willing to indulge Melissa in this for a little while.
indulging me. So he's indulging me. But what I want to talk about to you guys is that I think an undersung cultural impact, like a cultural impact story, is the story of the Sister Wives. It's a TV show. I can't remember if it's like what weird network it's on. But this show, and when it started, it was kind of like all happy, fun with these three women who were married to this one guy. His name is Cody something, and had a whole slew of kids, and they all talked about how great it was. And I remember watching that first and second season, and it was right, it all started right around with all of the gay marriage stuff was happening right at that time, and the slippery slope that everybody thought was going to happen, and kind of the certain things were decriminalized regarding polygamy, was that the next thing that was going to happen was people having more polygamy and polyamory and all of that. But this show has been fantastic. It has been absolutely revelatory. Any idiot man who thinks that this might be a good idea will be checking his priors after watching this show, and women too, who watch the show, because it's horrible. So when at the beginning, Cody had this first wife. They got married when they were young. They had one or two kids, normal, and then they're part of this sect, this Mormon sect, where they believe that you can have expanded love if you have, that you learn the love of God more if you have more spouses. And so they brought one and then another woman into the marriage and had, like, this guy had 3 houses, and they had visitation schedules going back and forth. It's really interesting. One of the wives was like completely content with it because she was very independent and only wanted to see this guy like once a week anyway. And but over time, he of course got dissatisfied with having 3 different women. That just wasn't enough for this guy. So he found this younger woman, and that's when everything went totally off the rails. And of course she's the favorite. She's younger and spoiled and used to certain things, which most women would expect as a bare minimum in a marriage, and wasn't too into this whole group thing. And so basically, all these families fell apart. And this guy is trying to, not very hard, I would say, make these women happy. And the other interesting thing is a couple of the older wives who'd been around for longer became good friends, and are good friends even after they've divorced him or whatever the relationship was. It was kind of strange. So he was married to his first wife, and then they had these marriages to these subsequent women that I don't know were legal marriages, but they were, in name and probably common law marriages. And or maybe the first one divorced him so he could legally marry these next ones. I can't remember how they did it all, but needless to say, he had all these wives. And then they ended up not together, and they've all divorced him. And now one of the women is, I think, remarried to someone else after dumping him. And kind of like the cascade started. Once these women started, the dating someone else and then whatever, then now he's left with the youngest wife, right? And kind of flummoxed by how this all happened to him. Which I really love. Like, he's just like, this is a big mystery for this guy, why all this happened. But what's been great culturally is that it's kind of like what Teen Mom did, the MTV show Teen Mom did for, having children out of wedlock. This show has absolutely exposed
Right.
Polygamy for what it actually is, which is
Right. Demystifies the entire thing.
Oh my goodness. And the trauma that is inherent in the system, in the New Testament, where it says that a deacon can only be the husband of one wife. You watch this show and you can completely see the wisdom of the Apostle Paul there talking about it, because this does not work. So, Scott, you said something when we were off camera last week that was, I thought, particularly insightful, which is one is that we all know there's a favorite, right?
Right.
But what does it do to the other women in the situation? They are not, there's no such thing as equal.
Right. Well, yeah. And I mean, I think the big thing that my kind of sister wives show was Big Love, that was on HBO, I don't know, maybe a decade or so ago. It was Bill Paxton. And he had, 3 wives on the show, and like Jean Triplehorn was the oldest one, and Chloe Sevigny was the second wife, and then Jennifer Goodwin was like the young kind of chippy who came along, right? And he had kids with all of them. And the show, he's like a car dealer, and he wants to get into politics, but he's trying to hide the fact that he's married to these 3 women. And so it's like complications on top of complications on top of complications. And it, like, the whole thing is just a disaster, right? And I think that even though it was kind of a comedy type show, and every season was sort of a bigger and bigger disaster that that it portrayed, there was a good deal of realism in that it's kind of almost an unnatural relationship to have like multiple spouses all over the place. Because nobody gets the kind of attention that they expected out of it. Right. Like, the guy probably does, but most guys would tell you that it's too much attention. Right? Because
maybe, like, I'm not sure.
Of positive attention, and then after that, the attention that comes beyond that is negative attention, right? And then you get to the point where you start feeling like Tiger Woods, where it's like, she has opinions about everything.
Right.
And not all of those opinions are any good for me. Why does she keep talking? Right. And when there's like 3 of them that all have that, and then they talk to each other, and then they gang up on you, and I don't see how anybody would actually want this. I mean, if you're in a Mormon sect that teaches that it's a good thing, or if you're a Muslim and it's like, they teach this, then I guess she's like, okay, well, this is, my duty to God is to maintain this or whatever. But just being a guy, I don't think the polygamy thing is really all that attractive. right?
I think it's one of those things that's attractive in theory, like a guy wanting to, have sex and there's two women. They're like,
Okay,
ooh, that sounds like
the
a really
variety,
good idea.
yes. But
And
there's
then
another word for that actually is much more attractive, particularly like modern Western guys, and that word is like spinning plates, meaning
right.
I got all these women and nobody puts too much pressure on me if I want to take them out for a date and we end up having sex or whatever, that's great.
Right.
But they know that it might be a couple weeks before we do this again.
Right.
Don't expect too much because that's what's on the table, right? And they're fine with it because he's a cool guy and whatever. And it's like, they value the time they spend with him. How many guys can pull that off for like a long time with
I would say that not even that
works.
works.
Not much. Like,
right.
Eventually they look for monogamy and maybe they can make that work and maybe they can't. But the presence of multiple women in a guy's life who know that each other are there.
Right.
There's not a lot of cultural references or even, like anecdotal stuff from your personal life that you can bring to the table to make an argument that, hey, this really does work. I mean, people really like it. No, they don't.
Right.
It's a disaster. And the vast majority of men will tell you what they're looking for is a much simpler and less complex life.
Right.
It is a series of tasks that can be accomplished and like obstacles that can be overcome. And when you throw all of that into the mix, it becomes impossible and exhausting. And is like a recipe for failure. And I don't know that there's a reason that when we were all saying, oh my God, they're going to do gay marriage and the next thing we're going to get is polygamy. There's a reason it ended up in pedophilia and transgenderism rather than polygamy. And it's because nobody really wants to make polygamy work.
Well,
nobody really wants to do that. Maybe the Muslims do, but the fact of the matter is most Muslims come to the West and they don't do the multiple marriages because they don't have to.
Right.
Right. And a lot of that is, I think it has more to do with the women than the men. I mean, there's plenty of guys out there like, whoa, I mean, we're going to have sex with more than one woman. That's probably a good idea. And they didn't even think about the negative consequences of that. The women are like, I'm not sharing him with her. And then, so you just can't pull that off. And so if you're, let's say you're, whatever, you're an Arab who lives in America and grew up here or whatever, and you're going to meet some girl in college and she's also, Muslim or whatever. Yeah, lots of luck saying, oh, by the way, I'm going to marry 2 or 3 others too. It's like, no, you're not. Right.
Well,
first of all, you're not going to do it in America. And second of all, you're not dragging me to Algeria where you can pull that off.
Well, the other thing I've seen, because one of my kids' best friend was Muslim, and she had very strict parents, and they have a network, these educated Muslim parents, where they kind of be like, somebody over here says, oh, I have a kid, I know my nephew is doing this, he's about the right age, and they kind of work to facilitate relationships. But I could promise you this girl's father would not be okay in the least with his daughter playing second fiddle with anyone. And I pity the fool who tried to make that happen. So, I don't know if if that's an American thing, but like, I can't even.
Well, it's a Western thing.
Right.
It's a Western, because in, Saudi Arabia or whatever, the culture is totally different. Right. And the way people think of daughters in Saudi Arabia is, it doesn't matter if you're the only wife or if you're one of several wives. What matters is how good's the husband. Right. Because if he's good enough that he handles 4 women, then you want that guy. Right. And like, nobody thinks about that in America. So, what you get with the people that would want to do the whole polygamy thing, most of which I guess here would be Mormons. These Mormon sects that do it tend to be like out in the middle of nowhere, and You know, I don't want to say, you know, rednecks or country people or whatever, but it's not an upscale thing.
Well, and as it turns out, it's miserable. So like that's why I love the show, because it's so revealing and so insightful to human nature and everything, that anybody who ever might think that it's an appealing idea, if they watch all these seasons, they're going to be dissuaded about that.
Entirely too complicated to even think about something like that.
Well, and
I'll put it to you this way, like, because, you know, I'm still more or less in the you know, dating pool. I can't even imagine finding 3 women or 4 women that I was like, yeah, I'll take that group and put them together.
You're killing me.
I can't even, to me, it's like a prison sentence that you're signing yourself up for. Nobody would want to do it.